Tell me, have you ever felt the quiet, electric certainty that you were meant to rise above the world that surrounds you, yet sensed an invisible force pressing you back down into the ordinary? That tension between destiny and suppression, brilliance and limitation, potential and resistance, is the birthplace of every genius history has ever feared, worshipped, hunted, or misunderstood. And Machiavelli knew this truth long before the modern mind tried to dress it in polite language. He observed it in kings, in tyrants, in thinkers who carried more weight inside their skulls than entire nations carried on their backs. He saw that greatness is never granted. It is taken, guarded, defended, hidden behind walls built from the kind of laws that the average person would never have the courage or the stomach to obey, to rise above everyone else, to think beyond them, to move before them, to see what they cannot see. You must accept a truth that most humans spend their entire lives running from. Genius is not a blessing. It is an affliction, a beautiful, dangerous curse that isolates you from the very world you are meant to shape. It separates you not only by intellect, but by hunger, by depth, by clarity, by an almost predatory instinct to understand what lies beneath the surface of people, systems, and illusions. And anyone who carries this burden must learn early that the world does not reward brilliance. It punishes it, it fears it, it resents it, it suffocates it, unless that brilliance becomes sharp enough, ruthless enough, and strategically disciplined enough to carve out its own survival. That is why Machiavelli crafted laws, not for the gentle, not for the moral, not for the publicly beloved, but for the quietly powerful, for the minds that want to remain above without being dragged down into the mud of ordinary human conflict, for those who want to build empires without letting the crowd's hands dirty their vision, for the rare thinkers who understand that superiority must be defended with the same ferocity that a nation defends its borders. You came here for those laws, not the romanticized ones, not the ones coated in philosophical perfume, but the real ones, the ruthless laws that keep geniuses above everyone else. Not through luck, not through admiration, through strategy, through an unbroken understanding of human nature, through a mind sculpted with the cold discipline of power. So listen closely, because the moment you take in the next breath, you step into a darker domain of understanding, a place where brilliance is not a gift, but a weapon, a place where ideas become fortresses and insights become daggers, a place where the genius survives not by appealing to the world, but by shaping it, bending it, anticipating it, and, when necessary, dominating it. Every person you will ever meet secretly believes they are smarter than they actually are. This is the first paradox of human intelligence. The second is that the true genius rarely believes they are as extraordinary as they truly are. Why? Because they see how much there is still to know, while the average mind stops thinking the moment it feels comfortable. This inversion creates tension. Envy on one side, humility on the other, and from this tension emerges conflict. The crowd senses something in you that they cannot describe, a depth they cannot measure, and instantly their instinct is to either pull you down or place chains around your mind so they do not have to feel the discomfort of your difference. But Machiavelli understood that genius must never kneel to the herd. If brilliance bends itself for acceptance, it becomes soft, dull, and slow. Everything intelligence is not meant to be. The mind of a genius must instead understand the laws that protect it, elevate it, and ensure that the very people who might one day envy or sabotage it instead become silent allies, obedient followers, or unknowing pawns. This is the beginning of the 7 ruthless laws. You are not yet ready to hear them directly. That comes later. First, you must be ushered into the psychological landscape they operate upon, the terrain of power, the battlefield of intellect, the dark underworld of human emotion where envy flows like poison in the bloodstream of society. Imagine walking into a room and feeling the weight of every eye before a single word is spoken. They don't hate you, not yet, but they fear you. They feel something in you that is different, sharper, colder, more aware, something that sees them, not their faces, not their clothes, not their polite words, but their motives, their insecurities, their desires. When a genius enters a room, they are not noticed, they are detected, like a shift in pressure, a disturbance in oxygen, a presence that bends the light around it. Do you think people admire what they do not understand? They admire what is familiar. They love what comforts them. They cheer for what reflects their own mediocrity back at them. But when something appears that makes them feel small, when an intellect shines so brightly that it exposes the shadows in their own minds, they react with a primitive hostility, sometimes subtle, sometimes explosive, always predictable. That is why Machiavelli wrote for those who stand above, those who must protect themselves not only from enemies, but from admirers, not only from threats, but from praise, not only from opposition, but from attachment. Genius calls to people and people cling. They cling because brilliance gives them warmth, direction, purpose, but their dependence becomes a chain. Their expectations become a trap. Their closeness becomes a leverage point. And so Machiavelli warned, the higher the mind, the greater the distance it must maintain. Intimacy with the crowd is the first step toward intellectual decay. But that distance must be calculated, not impulsive. Too much distance, and you become an outcast, someone feared but not followed, respected but not influential. Too little distance, and you drown in the noise of their trivial emotions. The genius must hover in the liminal space between fascination and untouchability, near enough to be seen, far enough to never be understood, close enough to influence, distant enough to never be controlled. Because the greatest danger to a superior mind is not resistance, it is contamination. Spend enough time around the ordinary, and you begin to internalize the ordinary. Their fears seep into you. Their doubts whisper into your thoughts. Their pace becomes your pace. Their limitations disguise themselves as caution. Their small ambitions masquerade as wisdom. You must recognize this early. Mediocrity is not passive. It spreads, it infects, it normalizes itself like a plague. And unless the genius protects their mind with a kind of ruthless discipline, the world will slowly smother their brilliance beneath the weight of its own insecurities. This is why the 7 laws exist. Each law is not designed to make you admired. It is designed to make you untouchable. Each law is not meant to make you popular. It is meant to make you powerful. Machiavelli cared nothing for love. He understood love fades, but fear sustains obedience. Admiration fluctuates, but respect endures. Attention is fleeting, but influence is permanent when rooted in strategy, not affection. To be a genius is to see patterns where others see chaos, to predict where others guess, to act where others hesitate. But to remain above, you must understand the psychology beneath those patterns, the psychology of those who do not think like you, who cannot think like you, and who, because of that gap, will attempt to pull you down to their level so they no longer feel the discomfort of your elevation. You will see it in friends who begin to resent your evolution, in colleagues who pretend to support you while secretly praying for your failure, in strangers who project their insecurities onto your confidence, in family members who urge you to be realistic, when what they really mean is, stay where I can understand you, stay where I can predict you, stay where you do not surpass me. But Machiavelli offers you a darker promise: rise anyway. Rise without apology. Rise without explanation. Rise without granting anyone access to the architecture of your mind. Because if the world cannot understand you, it cannot stop you. If it cannot read your motives, it cannot obstruct them. If it cannot anticipate your path, it cannot sabotage it. The 7 laws do not elevate the genius, they shield them. They prevent dilution. They maintain altitude. They create an invisible throne, a psychological dominion where the mind is sovereign and the world becomes a landscape to maneuver, not a force to bow before. Now let your breathing slow. Let your awareness sharpen. Let the noise around you fade until all that remains is this voice, this moment, this descent into the deeper corridors of power. Because what comes next is not for the faint-hearted, not for the seekers of comfort, not for those who wish to be loved. It is for those who understand that to live above is to live alone, but to live alone at the top is still to live far better than drowning among the many at the bottom. Before we enter the first of the 7 ruthless laws, you must accept one final truth. The world does not fear intelligence. It fears what intelligence becomes when paired with will. Will transforms thought into force. It shapes ideas into weapons. It carves destiny out of chaos. And when a genius possesses will, they become something far more dangerous than intelligent. They become inevitable. You are here because something in you has always felt inevitable. You have felt the pull towards something greater. You have felt the friction between your mind and the limitations of your environment. You have felt the loneliness of seeing deeper than others can see. You have felt the frustration of being surrounded by minds that cannot follow the pace of your thinking. And you have felt the quiet, violent urge to break through the suffocating ceiling the world places above anyone who is different. So now, breathe in, breathe out. Let the mantle of inevitability settle on your shoulders. The descent into Machiavelli's darker truths begins. Now you feel it already, don't you? The shift. The slow descent into the deeper, darker strata of the human mind where genius is not a shining crown but a sharpened blade. And now we go further, into the spaces where Machiavelli understood that brilliance is not safeguarded by intellect alone but by the brutal architecture of strategy that supports it. Because the higher your mind climbs, the more vicious the gravity of the world becomes. People do not simply stand aside and let you rise. They pull, they grip, they claw, and if you are not armed with the internal laws that keep geniuses above everyone else, your superiority becomes a target rather than a shield. To understand the first of these deeper laws, imagine a lone figure standing on the edge of a vast kingdom, not made of stone walls or armies, but of minds. Every human mind in that kingdom walks with its own insecurities, fears, desires, resentments. Most live quietly, buried in daily routine, but beneath the surface they churn with unspoken envy. And when someone rises above them, that buried envy becomes a weapon sharper than steel and more corrosive than poison. Machiavelli knew this far better than any modern philosopher. He understood that the crowd admires brilliance from afar, but resents it up close, because up close your existence becomes a mirror they cannot bear to look into. This is why the genius must master the law of emotional distance, not to be cold, but to be untouchable. If you let them too close, they will dissect you. If you let them too close, they will measure themselves against you and find themselves lacking, and in that bitterness they will plot to ruin you. Machiavelli saw it in courts and palaces, in scholars and generals, in kings who trusted too openly and were undone by the very hands they fed. He saw that the genius who gives access gives leverage, and leverage is the weapon of the mediocre. There is a darkness in every human heart that cannot tolerate the brilliance of another, unless that brilliance is either submissive or struggling. If you shine too brightly without suffering, they will hate you. If you are exceptional without apology, they will hunt you. But if you maintain the air of controlled mystery, the sense that you can be observed but never fully understood, they remain fascinated instead of threatened, obedient instead of rebellious. Distance creates awe, closeness creates contempt, but the inner law goes deeper, because the genius must not only maintain distance from others, they must maintain distance from their own hunger for validation. Every brilliant mind is tempted at times to reveal itself, to explain its logic, to prove its depth, to be seen and understood in full. But to be understood is to be exposed, and to be exposed is to be vulnerable. Explanation is the graveyard of power. Machiavelli warned that once people think they comprehend you, they stop fearing you. Worse, they stop respecting you. And once their respect fades, so does their caution. And once their caution fades, so does your advantage. A genius explains nothing. A genius reveals nothing unnecessarily. A genius allows misunderstandings to flourish, rumors to circulate, narratives to form, as long as those narratives serve the throne of their mind. Because the truth, the real truth, is too valuable to hand over to anyone freely. A superior mind must learn to bury parts of itself like treasure, knowing that what remains hidden is always more powerful than what is displayed. But even this distance is not enough to stay above. For the second law operates in the shadows of perception. While the herd sees the world through emotion, impulse, assumption, the genius must master the invisible patterns of human nature that govern those impulses. You cannot rise above people if you do not understand what moves them beneath the surface. And what moves them, more than logic or reason or morality, is fear. All human actions orbit around fear. Fear of failure, fear of embarrassment, fear of loss, fear of insignificance, fear of the unknown. Machiavelli saw that fear is the silent dictator of society. He did not mean terror or brutality alone. He meant the subtle psychological pressure that bends people's behavior more effectively than any law ever could. And the genius who understands fear, and more importantly, The genius who knows how to evoke it without force commands an invisible empire. Consider this. Most people are ruled not by what they desire, but by what they hope to avoid. They will betray their goals to escape discomfort. They will abandon their ambitions to avoid humiliation. They will follow a leader they dislike if that leader promises safety. The genius who grasps this subtle truth can steer the behavior of others without ever issuing commands. You do not need to intimidate openly. You do not need to threaten. You simply become the figure whose disapproval carries weight, whose silence holds judgment, whose presence alone triggers self-correction in those around you. Machiavelli understood that the most effective form of fear is not panic, it is uncertainty. Keep them unsure and they obey. Keep them guessing and they yield. Keep them wondering what you might do, and they will shape their actions around avoiding your disfavor. This is the psychological throne the genius must build. Not a throne of domination, but of unpredictability. Predictability is the enemy of power. Once they can anticipate you, they can neutralize you. Once they can read you, they can deceive you. But if you move like a shifting shadow, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, sometimes distant, sometimes attentive, you create a fog of mystery that renders their instincts useless. And yet, beneath this fog lies another law, deeper, sharper, more dangerous. The genius must master the art of selective invisibility. Every powerful mind must know when to appear and when to disappear, when to strike and when to wait, when to be seen and when to melt into silence. Genius is not constant visibility. Genius is controlled presence. If you are always present, they grow accustomed to you. If they grow accustomed to you, they stop fearing you. And once they stop fearing you, they stop respecting you. But if you appear only at key moments, moments when your presence alters the course of events, you become mythic. Machiavelli knew that myth is stronger than truth. Myth is more durable than explanation. Myth can protect you long after your actions end. People do not remember the details, they remember the feeling you left them with. Become the figure whose rare appearances shift the room. Become the mind whose silence creates tension. Become the presence whose absence is felt more than most people's existence. This is how the genius stays above, not by constant brilliance, but by strategic brilliance. Imagine a chessboard. The average player moves constantly, desperately, reacting to every threat, spending energy on every square. But the master knows the power of stillness. A piece left unmoved for half the game can become the deciding factor in the final moment. Genius is not motion, it is mastery of timing. And timing is the difference between wasted potential and inevitable victory. But even this is not enough, because the true law that separates geniuses from the world is the law of internal sovereignty. Most people do not own their own minds. They are puppets of emotion, slaves to insecurity, prisoners to their own cravings for approval. They make decisions based on external conditions, on what others will think, on what others might say, on the invisible pressures of judgment. They surrender their autonomy without even realizing it. The genius, however, must become sovereign, internally untouchable, mentally immune. You cannot rise above if the world can contaminate your judgment. This sovereignty begins with the brutal acceptance that your mind will be lonely. There is no companionship at the peak of thought. There is no crowd on the path of self-mastery. When you see deeper than others, you will always feel like a stranger in familiar places. When you understand what others avoid thinking about, you will feel your intellect stretching far beyond the comfortable limits of social existence. Loneliness is not the price of genius. It is its natural environment. And only those who accept this solitude without flinching can fully unlock the strategic potential of their minds, because when you detach emotionally from the world, you begin to see its machinery without distortion. You see how people pretend, how they mask their insecurities, how they speak indirectly to avoid exposing their motives, how they lie without realizing they are lying, how they sabotage themselves and blame fate, how they envy others but disguise that envy as criticism, how they crave validation from those they secretly resent. You see all of this with a clarity that can either destroy you or empower you, depending on whether you fight your detachment or embrace it. Machiavelli believed that genius must embrace it, because once you stop expecting people to think like you stop being disappointed by their limitations. Once you stop expecting loyalty from those who cannot even remain loyal to themselves, You stop being blindsided by betrayal. Once you stop expecting depth from shallow minds, you stop wasting energy trying to pull them upward. Sovereignty means accepting the world as it is, not as you wish it to be. And from this acceptance grows a power sharper than intellect. Clarity. Clarity is the ultimate weapon of genius. Clarity cuts through manipulation. Clarity exposes lies. Clarity neutralizes emotion. Clarity reveals opportunities that others cannot see, but clarity can only exist in a mind that is not clouded by the need for acceptance, attachment, or validation. This is why the genius remains above, not through arrogance but through discipline, not through superiority but through separation, not through domination but through understanding. But Machiavelli did not stop there. He warned that genius must be defended not just from external threats, but from internal erosion. Because even the greatest minds carry within them a silent enemy, doubt. The doubt that whispers, "Perhaps I am not as capable as I thought." The doubt that murmurs, "What if I fail?" The doubt that claws at the edges of ambition, trying to pull it down into hesitation. And the world tries to feed this doubt, nurture it, strengthen it, because a doubting genius is safe. A confident genius is dangerous. So a ruthless law emerges. Your self-belief must be engineered, not inherited. You cannot wait for confidence to arrive naturally. You must build it like a fortress, stone by stone, thought by thought. Confidence is not the absence of insecurity. It is the refusal to submit to insecurity. It is the iron decision to trust your mind even when the world questions it. Because if you do not trust your own intellect, no one else ever will. Think of every vision you've had that others dismissed, every idea they called unrealistic, every instinct they overlooked, every ambition they mocked, every moment they tried to confine you to a smaller version of yourself so they could feel comfortable standing beside you. Genius is the refusal to shrink. It is the commitment to grow even when growth makes others uncomfortable. It is the courage to evolve even when evolution demands isolation. And from this inner evolution comes the next law. The genius must master influence without attachment. Influence is the power to shift others' behavior, beliefs, or emotions. Attachment is the vulnerability that makes you dependent on their response. You must be able to shape people without needing them, guide them without relying on them, inspire them without trusting them, use their strengths without being chained to their weaknesses. This is not cruelty, it is realism, because attachment blinds strategy, but influence sharpens it. Imagine standing on the edge of a battlefield. You control the wind, but not the soldiers. You control the terrain, but not their loyalty. You cannot trust them to protect you, but you can control the conditions that determine how they act. That is Machiavellian influence, indirect, subtle, omnipresent. You do not tell them what to do. You create an environment where the only logical decision is the one that benefits you. This is how the genius survives, through shaping realities, not through demanding loyalty. And now we come to a darker truth. One Machiavelli whispered beneath the ink. One too dangerous for the average mind, but essential for the superior one. Human beings are predictable, even the clever ones, even the deceptive ones. Their behavior follows patterns as old as civilization. Their desires repeat, their fears repeat, their strategies repeat. The genius who studies these repetitions becomes immune to surprise, immune to manipulation, immune to betrayal. You cannot rise above what you have not studied. And once you understand the predictable nature of human behavior, you gain an advantage that no title, no wealth, no talent can replicate. Machiavelli taught that the superior mind should never judge the world by moral standards, only by psychological ones. If you expect honesty, you will be deceived. If you expect gratitude, you will be disappointed. If you expect loyalty, you will be blindsided. But if you expect self-interest, patterns become obvious. Motives become transparent. People become readable, and once people become readable, they become controllable. Control is not domination. Control is anticipation. Control is prediction. Control is the ability to see 3 moves ahead while others are distracted by the present moment. Control is foresight, sharpened by observation, and observation is the currency of every genius who has ever ruled a kingdom, be it a kingdom of nations or a kingdom of ideas. But even with all these laws, there is one more truth you must swallow before you can rise above. It is a truth that most are too fragile to face. a truth that Machiavelli knew would separate the brilliant from the exceptional. The higher you rise, the lonelier you become, not because you push people away, but because few can breathe the air at your altitude. Few understand the clarity you see with. Few grasp the consequences of your insight. Few possess the discipline to walk beside you without feeling overshadowed. And so, slowly, the higher mind is lifted into a different realm, one where the crowd cannot follow, where only the self remains. But this loneliness is not suffering, it is sovereignty. And once you embrace that sovereignty, you transcend the need for approval, escape the gravitational pull of mediocrity, and step fully into the strategic power Machiavelli reserved only for those rare enough, ruthless enough, to ascend above the world. This is the threshold, cross it, and the 7 laws no longer remain theories. They become the architecture of your evolution. There comes a moment in every rising mind when the world begins to shift around you, not because it has changed, but because you have. You start to see through people the way light passes through glass. You begin to hear the unsaid behind their words, the concealed behind their expressions, the intention behind their politeness. And with this perception comes a new kind of danger, the danger of seeing too much. Because the more you understand people, the more you recognize how few of them are capable of walking beside a genius without attempting to restrain it, contain it, or dilute it. And this is where the next ruthless law begins to coil around your life like a patient shadow. To stay above everyone else, you must master the law of controlled invisibility, the ability not only to hide your intentions, but to hide the speed of your evolution. People tolerate your growth only when it grows slowly. They tolerate brilliance only when it is half asleep. But if your rise becomes too rapid, if your insight becomes too piercing, if your ambition becomes too visible, they panic. They sense that you are leaving the gravitational pull of their world, and instinctively they reach for you, not to lift themselves, but to pull you back down. Machiavelli understood this primitive response better than any modern psychologist could articulate. He witnessed how kings were overthrown not at the height of their tyranny, but at the height of their competence. When a ruler became too effective, too efficient, too visionary, the lesser minds around him trembled, not because he was dangerous, but because his brilliance highlighted their own irrelevance. Envy, Machiavelli believed, is the most reliable force in politics. But envy is not confined to kings and courts. It breathes quietly in families, in workplaces, in friendships, in every fragile ego that sees another climbing with a speed it cannot match. This is why the genius must never display the full magnitude of their intelligence, not openly, not recklessly, not in a world that weaponizes envy the way primitive societies weaponized fire. Your power must be like the deep ocean, vast, silent, invisible from the surface, yet capable of swallowing anyone who dares to underestimate it. Let them see enough to respect you, but not enough to measure you. Let them admire the brightness, but never see the flame's true temperature. The greatest danger to a genius is exposure without preparation. If they see your brilliance before they depend on it, they will resist you. But if they come to rely on you first, on your competence, your clarity, your results, then your brilliance becomes not a threat, but a necessity. People only fear what they do not rely on, and they only hate what they do not need. The moment they need you, their envy is forced into silence, their resentment into submission, their insecurity into servitude. But reliance is not the end goal. It is merely the leverage that allows you to reshape the environment around you. Because what Machiavelli truly feared for the genius was not envy from others. It was influence from the wrong people. A superior mind can be ruined not by attack but by contagion. The thoughts of the mediocre, when absorbed through prolonged exposure, can infect even the sharpest intellect. Their doubts infiltrate your confidence. Their fears infect your ambition. Their limited reasoning narrows your imagination. And slowly, without noticing it, you begin to think in smaller patterns, breathe in shorter rhythms, dream in lower ceilings. So the next law emerges. Protect your inner circle with a ruthlessness the world will never understand. A genius cannot be surrounded by those who drain, who doubt, who diminish. You must walk through your environment with the cold judgment of a strategist, choosing soldiers, allies, informants. Some people must be kept at a distance, not because they are dangerous, but because they are dull. Their presence deadens the electricity of your thoughts. Their concerns are trivial compared to the architecture of your mind. Their worldview is too narrow to support the height you are building toward. And when their smallness rubs against your greatness long enough, it begins to smooth the sharpness of your perception, blunt the edges of your drive, soften the conviction of your purpose. A genius does not simply choose their associates. They curate them, they filter with precision, they assess with silence. They keep those who elevate them and release those who diminish them. This is not cruelty. This is conservation of mind. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must be cautious with those he allows near, for even the loyal can unconsciously weaken a ruler by infecting him with their timidity. And a single moment of timidity in a mind built for power can collapse an entire future. But choosing your circle is not enough. You must also master the law of psychological camouflage. A genius who announces their superiority invites challenge. A genius who displays too much certainty invites attack. A genius who shows no vulnerability becomes the villain in the eyes of the insecure. But a genius who wears the perfect mask, a mask of humility, relatability, even slight uncertainty, disarms the crowd. They do not prepare to battle you. They prepare to support you. They underestimate your depth and therefore never defend themselves against your strategy. Machiavelli knew that camouflage is not deception, it is protection. It is choosing when to reveal your real face and when to hide it behind a mask crafted with intention. Most people live with masks they are unaware of, but the genius chooses theirs deliberately. Their softness may be a strategy, their silence may be a trap, their friendliness may be an illusion that keeps others comfortable while the genius moves in ways they cannot anticipate. Camouflage is not the suppression of brilliance, it is the preservation of it. But the genius must beware another subtler danger, the intoxication of being understood. Every powerful mind, no matter how self-sufficient, no matter how disciplined, harbors a quiet longing to be recognized, to be appreciated, to be seen for what they truly are. This longing is natural, it is human. But intention alone is not enough, for the world does not reward brilliance unless brilliance becomes strategically armed. And so, we reach the next ruthless law, the law of asymmetrical power. In every environment, there is visible power and invisible power. Visible power is loud, obvious, celebrated. Titles, positions, awards, reputation. Invisible power is subtle, quiet, unstoppable. Information, timing, psychological leverage, the ability to predict outcomes before others can even interpret the present. A genius must always choose invisible power. Visible power makes you a target. Invisible power makes you untouchable. When they underestimate you, you win. When they misread you, you win. When they believe you are less aware than you are, you win. When they prepare for an attack that never comes while missing the one they cannot see, you win. Machiavelli wrote that the strongest princes are those whose enemies do not understand their full strength. And the weakest princes are those who reveal their power too quickly, inviting forces they are not yet prepared to battle. The genius must learn to cultivate hidden advantage, knowledge that others don't have, alliances others don't know about, strategies others cannot predict, skills others cannot measure. Because superiority is not a display, it is an ecosystem of unseen advantages. But even with hidden advantages, even with distance, even with discipline and camouflage, the genius faces the greatest challenge of all, the temptation of distraction. The world is full of noise, endless chatter, trivial conflicts, emotional entanglements, meaningless competitions. And if a superior mind falls into the trap of responding to every provocation, arguing every point, proving every opinion, it drains its power into 1,000 pointless directions. Distraction is the graveyard, where most intelligent people bury their potential. Machiavelli warned that a ruler who fights every battle loses the empire. A genius who responds to every provocation loses the future. People will bait you. They will try to pull you into their arguments. They will attempt to provoke you into defending yourself, proving yourself, explaining yourself. Do not take the bait. Silence is the language of the superior. Indifference is the armor of the strategic. Focus is the realm where the genius becomes untouchable. You must conserve your mental energy the way kings conserved gold. Spend it only where it alters the path of destiny. Spend it only where the outcome fuels your evolution. Spend it only where the investment compounds. Anything else is theft against your own future. And now we approach the core of the third chunk, the law of inevitable transformation. As you rise, you are not simply becoming more intelligent. You are becoming psychologically different from those around you. Your thoughts stretch into dimensions inaccessible to ordinary minds. Your perception sharpens in ways others cannot follow. Your ambition crystallizes into something sacred, something dangerous, something unstoppable. But this transformation terrifies people. They sense you drifting upward, slipping out of their emotional reach, and their instinct is to pull you back, not by force, but by sentiment. They will use nostalgia, they will use guilt, they will use affection, they will use fear, they will remind you who you used to be. They will try to resurrect older versions of you because those versions were easier for them to understand. The genius must resist this gravitational pull with iron will. Transformation is your destiny. Regression is your death. Every time you evolve, the world loses a little more control over you. Every time you sharpen, the world becomes a little more afraid. Every time you detach, the world becomes a little more dependent on your stability. And this is the secret Machiavelli knew but rarely stated directly. Power belongs not to those who dominate others, but to those who dominate themselves. When your own mind obeys you with absolute discipline, no external force can conquer you. When your impulses kneel before your strategic reasoning, no enemy can provoke you. When your emotions serve your ambition rather than sabotage it, no betrayal can break you. The genius's power is not in their intelligence alone. It is in the mastery of themselves. And when you master yourself, you become the one thing the world cannot cage: unpredictable, uncontrollable, unstoppable. This is the ascent Machiavelli reserved for the rarest minds, those capable not only of seeing the world clearly but of seeing themselves clearly. And this clarity is what elevates the genius from someone extraordinary into someone formidable. You have begun the climb, but the summit is yet to come. They say a genius stands alone at the summit because he sees what others refuse to look at. But the truth is far darker. A genius rises not simply because of superior intellect, but because he learns to survive the psychological storms that destroy everyone else. Every era, every kingdom, every workplace, every digital battlefield is littered with brilliant minds who collapsed under the weight of their own sensitivity, their own loneliness, their own depth. Yet the few who endure, the few who rise, the few whose names echo long after their voices fall silent, they all share one terrifying trait. Their strength does not come from talent, but from a ruthless resilience. The average person cannot even imagine. That resilience is born not in comfort, but in conflict. Not in gentle encouragement, but in the cold, relentless grip of resistance. And Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. He saw that a genius becomes exceptional not because the world applauds him, but because the world tries to break him, and fails. It pushes against him, hoping he will fold, hoping he will beg for acceptance, hoping he will shrink back into the anonymity that protects the ordinary. But instead of retreating, he grows sharper, harder, more precise. And with each rejection, each betrayal, each moment of isolation, he becomes less vulnerable to human approval and more attuned to human nature. The fourth ruthless law is the law of emotional austerity, the ability to detach from the chaos of the world long enough to understand it. Most people drown in their own emotions: fear, envy, insecurity, desire, validation-seeking impulses. They act impulsively, speak impulsively, love impulsively, destroy impulsively. They are driven by inner storms they never learn to navigate. A genius, however, learns to pull back, not from life, but from attachment to its noise. He sees emotions the way a general sees weather: unpredictable, sometimes violent, usually inconvenient, but always manageable through strategy. He does not trust feelings, because feelings distort truth. He does not rely on comfort, because comfort distorts discipline. He does not seek emotional safety, because emotional safety distorts ambition. Instead, he cultivates the ability to feel deeply while acting rationally, to care intensely while deciding objectively, to burn with vision while remaining ice-cold in execution. This is what separates creators from dreamers, visionaries from fantasists, leaders from those who follow them blindly. Emotional austerity is not numbness, it is mastery. It is the ability to say, "My emotions may roar like fire, but they will never decide for me." And this terrifies people, because those who cannot control their own emotions are always frightened by someone who can. They sense the difference. They see a steadiness in his eyes, a silent weight in his presence, a calm that feels unnatural in a world built on panic, and they will try to shake him, rattle him, disrupt him, provoke him, because if they can disturb his calm, they can bring him back down to their level. But when they fail, something shifts. They begin to fear him. And fear, Machiavelli noted, is the purest form of respect. Yet emotional austerity alone is not enough. For the fifth law rises silently behind it, the law of calculated isolation. Genius requires space, not only physical, but mental, psychological, existential. The kind of space that allows thoughts to collide with one another, dissolve, reform, mutate, sharpen, evolve. Most people cannot bear silence because silence forces them to confront themselves. They need noise, distraction, constant social stimulation to avoid hearing the uncomfortable truths echoing inside their own minds. But a genius seeks solitude not to escape the world, but to penetrate deeper into it. It is in isolation that patterns reveal themselves, in isolation that ideas take shape, in isolation that illusions shatter, and in isolation that the mind begins to see connections others overlook. Solitude is not the absence of company, it is the presence of clarity. Only in isolation can a person hear the subtle rhythms beneath the chaos, why people behave the way they do, why power flows in the direction it flows, why societies repeat the same mistakes, why leaders rise and fall, why human hearts betray themselves. But solitude is heavy. It demands a spine that does not bend, and a spirit that does not collapse under the weight of silence. And because of this, most people flee from it. They drown themselves in relationships, gossip, noise, meaningless movement, shallow goals. They fear being alone, because in that emptiness they discover their lack of identity. Yet the genius embraces it, because he knows that solitude is the birthplace of every revolution the world has ever known. Political, scientific, artistic, strategic, psychological. Still, even with clarity and emotional control, genius must face its most dangerous adversary, resentment. People resent what they do not understand. They resent what they cannot control. They resent talent that makes them feel smaller, insight that makes them feel blind, ambition that makes them feel stagnant. And this resentment moves like smoke, subtle, suffocating, creeping through friendships, workplaces, families, alliances. It does not announce itself. It does not confront. It corrodes. This is where the sixth law reveals its brutal truth. Conceal the magnitude of your mind. A genius who exposes the full extent of his insight becomes a target. The more others sense your superiority, the more urgently they will search for ways to undermine it. Human beings are not comfortable standing beneath someone who sees further than they do. They will hide their insecurity behind humor, behind criticism, behind false praise, behind advice that attempts to shrink your ambition into something less threatening. But if you hide the fullness of your power, if you mask the depth of your thinking, if you move like a shadow instead of a flame, they never know how to attack you, because they never understand what you are truly capable of. This concealment is not deception. It is self-preservation. A sword kept hidden cannot be blocked. A strategy kept quiet cannot be sabotaged. Your intelligence becomes lethal only when it is silent. Machiavelli often warned that a prince must think more than he speaks and observe more than he reveals. A genius does the same. He listens while others argue. He observes while others perform. He studies while others judge. And when he finally acts, his movement feels like destiny because no one saw it forming. But the seventh law, the darkest, most misunderstood law, is the law of self-created myth, because in the end, genius is not merely intelligence, nor ambition, nor resilience. True genius is the ability to shape perception itself, not through lies but through narrative, through the story you allow the world to believe about you. Every influential figure in history understood this. Power is strongest not when people fear your actions, but when they believe in your inevitability. A myth does not need to be supernatural. It only needs to create psychological gravity, an aura that makes people sense that you are different, that your path is not theirs, that your trajectory is beyond their control. This myth can be built through scarcity, mystery, contradiction, confidence, unpredictability. It is not about pretending to be something you're not. It is about amplifying the truth that already exists inside you, the truth that threatens others, the truth that sets you apart, the truth that would get you attacked if you displayed it directly. Geniuses are myth makers, not because they want admiration, but because they understand that myth protects them. It creates distance. It creates strategic ambiguity. It creates the psychological space needed to operate above the crowd. The world respects the enigmatic more than the transparent, the elusive more than the desperate, the composed more than the chaotic. When people cannot fully read you, they cannot fully control you, and when they cannot control you, they begin to believe you operate on a level they cannot reach. Myth is not arrogance, it is armor woven from perception. Yet the creation of such a myth comes with a sacrifice. You lose the ability to be casual, ordinary, easily understood. You lose the comfort of blending in. You become a symbol rather than a person, a standard rather than a participant, a challenge rather than a companion. And though this isolation may feel cold, it is the very coldness that lifts you above everyone else. For Machiavelli knew that greatness is rarely warm. It is forged in the frost of discipline, vision, and relentless self-possession. But the deeper you ascend, the more the world around you begins to distort. People project their fantasies onto you, their fears, their insecurities, their envy. They assume motives you never had, intentions you never considered, strengths you never displayed. They dissect your silence, overanalyze your movements, misinterpret your restraint. And the higher you rise, the more violently they cling to their own misinterpretations. Because the idea of you becomes more powerful than the reality. And that is precisely what keeps a genius above everyone else, not pure intellect, but the psychological elevation created by the myths others build around him. And yet the most extraordinary part is this. The genius knows all of this. He knows he is mythologized. He knows the misunderstandings, the distortions, the projections. He watches them unfold, like a strategist observing the battlefield from a distant tower. And instead of resisting those narratives, he uses them, shapes them, fortifies them, because he understands that power is not held by the one who speaks, but by the one who is spoken about. That is why the world bends around those few individuals, not by force, but by gravity. There comes a point in every genius's ascent when he realizes that the world he once lived in is gone forever, not because he has abandoned it, but because he has outgrown it. This is the invisible threshold, the moment when the mind stretches itself beyond the limits of ordinary perception and cannot shrink back into its old form. It is the moment when you look around and see the truth, you are not like them anymore. And once you cross that boundary, returning to normality becomes impossible. The door behind you locks, and the only path is forward, into territory that fewer and fewer can follow. Machiavelli saw this not as tragedy, but as liberation. For what the world calls loneliness, he recognized as elevation. Yet this elevation comes with a cost so heavy that most people crumble long before they reach it. The cost is the weight of awareness, seeing too much, understanding too deeply, perceiving the undercurrents beneath every interaction. Genius is not a gift of intelligence, it is a burden of insight. It is the ability to detect dishonesty in the tone of a friend, insecurity in the laugh of a rival, ulterior motive in the kindness of a stranger. It is hearing what people mean instead of what they say. It is noticing the flicker of jealousy in the eyes of someone who claims to support you. It is witnessing the fragility of human ego every time you display even a fraction of your potential. Once a mind becomes this perceptive, it carries a truth most cannot bear. People do not admire greatness, they endure it. They do not celebrate genius. They tolerate it until it becomes threatening. And when it does, they turn. Sometimes subtly, sometimes violently, but always inevitably. This is why Machiavelli insisted that the wise man must never rely on affection. Affection is fickle. Affection shifts. Affection evaporates the moment your abilities disrupt someone's sense of importance. The genius learns this early. A careless comment, an unexpected achievement, an effortless solution to a problem someone else struggled with. These moments accumulate until the atmosphere around him changes. The air thickens with resentment. The smiles become thinner, the conversations shorter, the compliments more hollow. People begin to test him, challenge him, diminish him, hoping to return him to a size that makes them comfortable. And when he does not shrink, they start questioning his intentions, his morality, his character. They cannot attack his ability directly, so they attack everything around it. This is the first sign that the genius has surpassed the psychological height that binds others together. And it gives birth to the eighth ruthless truth. The higher you rise, the more carefully you must choose what parts of yourself the world is allowed to see. Not out of fear, but out of strategy. Because the world does not react to your talent, it reacts to the emotions your talent stirs within them. And every human emotion, whether admiration, envy, affection, or intimidation, is a lever. The genius who understands these levers shapes the battlefield. The genius who ignores them gets crucified by those he once underestimated. But this leads to something deeper. The ninth, unspoken law, the necessity of psychological asymmetry. Most people think symmetrically. If someone likes them, they like them back. If someone trusts them, they trust in return. If someone hurts them, they retaliate immediately. This emotional symmetry creates predictability, and predictability creates weakness. The genius must never be predictable. He must never allow others to map his reactions or anticipate his responses. He must cultivate a level of psychological distance that allows him to stand firm even when the world pushes, manipulates, provokes, or demands. This distance does not mean coldness, it means sovereignty. It means knowing that your inner world cannot be invaded unless you open the gates yourself, and once those gates are protected, the genius becomes untouchable. People can misunderstand him, criticize him, even attempt to destroy him, but they can never control him. And the inability to control a person is the foundation of both fear and fascination. Those who cannot be controlled become legends. There is something profoundly dangerous about a person who cannot be manipulated, someone who cannot be guilt-tripped, someone who cannot be shamed into conformity, someone who does not respond to pressure the way ordinary people do. This kind of person becomes a psychological anomaly in the eyes of everyone around him. They study him, test him, push him, try to decode him, try to break him, and when they realize they cannot, they begin to orbit him. The human mind, especially the insecure mind, gravitates toward that which it cannot fully understand. And yet, despite this growing aura of inevitability, the genius remains vulnerable, not to others, but to himself. Because the 10th law of genius is the law of inner fracture, the internal battle between who you are and who the world wants you to be. This fracture grows as your influence grows. The more insight you gain, the more isolated you become. The more capable you become, the more burdens you carry. The more success you accumulate, the more expectations pile upon your back. And amidst all this, you are still human. You still feel pain. You still crave understanding. You still want connection, but connection becomes harder, because the more self-aware you become, the more painfully you notice the superficiality of most interactions. You hear the fear in people's voices when they speak to you. You sense the calculations behind their words. You see the envy behind their compliments. You feel the tension in their presence. Genuine connection becomes rare, not because you refuse it, but because so few can meet you where you are. This internal fracture is what destroys most gifted people. They bend themselves into shapes that appease the world. They downplay their abilities. They dull their intelligence. They hide their ambition. They shrink into versions of themselves that make others comfortable. But every time they shrink, something inside them withers. A mind built for vast landscapes suffocates when forced into small rooms. And eventually, the fractures deepen, spreading through their identity like cracks in glass. But a true genius does not shrink, he expands. And this brings forth the 11th law, the orchestration of controlled dominance. Not dominance over people, dominance over direction, over momentum, over the psychological atmosphere of every room he steps into. Because power is never about force, power is about presence. It is the quiet, unspoken authority that emerges when a person has mastered himself so thoroughly that others instinctively adjust their behavior around him. A genius does not command the room through volume. He does not demand attention. He absorbs it. He does not insist on respect. He embodies the qualities that extract it naturally. People feel his certainty. They sense his depth. They recognize his silence not as insecurity, but as consideration. They interpret his unusual calm as a sign of deeper strength. And in that presence, their own insecurities rise to the surface, making him appear even more powerful. This controlled dominance is not about intimidation, It is about psychological gravity. Some people speak with such clarity that their words shift the energy of an entire group. Some people think with such depth that even their silence alters the trajectory of a conversation. Some people move with such intention that others unconsciously wait to follow their lead. This is the kind of dominance that separates the visionary from the crowd. But it is not enough to hold power privately. The genius must also understand how to influence the public sphere without being consumed by it. And this leads to the 12th law, strategic invisibility. When the public sees too much of you, they begin to feel ownership over you. They begin to scrutinize you, distort you, dissect you. Exposure breeds familiarity, and familiarity erodes mystique. The genius must decide not only what to reveal, but when, how, and to whom. The world should see only a fraction of your capacity. Your ideas must arrive like lightning, unexpected, overwhelming, and impossible to ignore. Your achievements should appear effortless, even if built from sleepless nights and silent suffering. Your movements should seem unpredictable, even when carefully calculated. The less they understand your process, the more they believe in your power. Strategic invisibility is the shield that protects greatness. It prevents people from assigning limits to you. It prevents rivals from mapping your strategy. It prevents critics from finding weak points. And most importantly, it prevents the world from trivializing you through familiarity. Every revolutionary mind in history operated from the shadows before stepping into the light. And even then, they stepped in only briefly, leaving more questions than answers. And when all these laws converge, emotional austerity, calculated isolation, concealment, myth-making, psychological asymmetry, controlled dominance, strategic invisibility, the genius reaches the final threshold, the realm of sovereign identity. This is the 13th, most merciless law. You must become the architect of your own existence. Most people are shaped by the world, by culture, by family, by expectations, by fear. They move according to scripts written by others. But a genius writes his own script. He carves his own philosophy. He builds an identity that does not depend on validation, approval, or conformity. This identity becomes a fortress no one can invade, a throne no one can dethrone, a kingdom no one else can govern. This is not an identity built on ego, it is built on self-awareness. The genius knows exactly who he is, not because society told him, but because he dissected himself with brutal honesty until all illusions fell away. He has confronted his darkness, his ambition, his flaws, his desires, his purpose, and in doing so, he has built a clarity so unshakable that the world cannot rewrite it. A sovereign identity is terrifying to others because it destroys their illusions. People are comfortable when everyone follows the same invisible rules. Seek approval, avoid discomfort, pretend, perform, apologize, conform. But when they encounter someone who refuses these rules, who operates independently of social pressure, who does not beg for acceptance, who does not collapse under judgment, something inside them trembles. They see what they could have been if they had not surrendered their power, and that realization burns. This is why geniuses are rare, not because intelligence is rare, but because sovereignty is. And the higher the genius climbs, the more he realizes that the true battlefield is not the world. It is human psychology. It is insecurity versus clarity, fear versus ambition, conformity versus self-definition. And the genius wins not by conquering others, but by conquering himself so completely that others unconsciously fall into the gravity of his certainty. Every word he speaks, every silence he holds, every choice he makes carries the weight of someone who knows exactly what he is becoming. This is the ascent few dare to take. The path where the air grows thin, where the light is scarce, where the echoes of your own thoughts become louder than the voices of the world. But it is in this altitude that a mind stops being ordinary and becomes something else entirely. Something ungoverned, unmanipulated, unbroken. And by the time the genius looks back at the world he left behind, he realizes something chilling. He no longer fits there. He never will again. But he also realizes something liberating he was never meant to. They say the final ascent is the loneliest, but what they never tell you is why. It is not lonely because there are no people left beside you. It is lonely because at this height, the human world becomes transparent. You see through intentions, through fragile egos, through the veils that once disguised people's motivations. You see through social expectations that once controlled you. You see through the masks everyone wears, through the illusions they protect, through the fears they hide behind laughter and confidence. And once your eyes have adjusted to this clarity, you can never unsee what stands behind the facade. The world becomes a collection of open pages, readable, predictable, navigable. But with that clarity comes a realization so heavy, it cracks the foundation beneath you. Most people will never understand you because they cannot even understand themselves. This is where the genius discovers the 14th ruthless truth. The world does not rise to meet those who elevate themselves. It tries to pull them back down, not out of cruelty, but because your elevation forces them to confront their own stagnation. Your discipline exposes their excuses. Your ambition exposes their laziness. Your independence exposes their dependency. Your clarity exposes the illusions they built to survive. And for many, these illusions are all they have. When your presence threatens them, they will not thank you for the awakening. They will resent you for disturbing their sleep. People cling to their limitations the way drowning men cling to debris. They hold on to their comfort zones with white knuckles. They defend their insecurity as though it were identity. And when a genius walks among them, he becomes a mirror they cannot bear to look into. So they project their fears onto him. They invent narratives to make sense of their discomfort. They call him arrogant, cold, selfish, dangerous, too ambitious, too intense, too different. Because labeling him is easier than changing themselves. The genius learns that he is not hated for who he is, but for what he represents, the possibility of a life lived without excuses. And as he steps further into his own potential, he realizes something even darker. People want you to improve, but never too much. They want you to succeed, but never beyond their reach. They want you to be confident, but not confident enough to threaten their sense of superiority. They want you to think deeply, but not so deeply that they can no longer keep up. They want you to stand out, but not so far out that they must crane their necks to see you. This is why the greatest enemy of genius is not failure. It is the mediocrity that surrounds him. Mediocrity suffocates. It whispers doubts. It demands conformity. It imposes ceilings. It diminishes dreams. But the genius who rises above it must confront the 15th law. You must outgrow the environment that shaped you, your childhood, your friendships, your old communities, your early beliefs. They form the foundation of who you were, but they cannot remain the architecture for who you are becoming. You cannot build a castle on the soil meant for a cottage. You cannot develop a philosopher's mind in a crowd addicted to distraction. You cannot cultivate ambition among those who fear change. You cannot expand your inner world while surrounded by people who demand that you shrink. Growth creates distance, and distance is the price of evolution. But that distance also creates clarity. It reveals who was truly aligned with your soul and who was only aligned with your struggles. Those who celebrated you when you were small, but withdrew when you began to expand, were never supporters. They were companions of convenience. True allies do not fear your transformation, they understand it. They encourage it. They rise with it. But the genius learns quickly that he will meet very few of these. And so another truth emerges. The 16th law, the mind that rises must learn to guide itself. Once you reach a certain level of consciousness, no mentor, no leader, no system can fully guide you. You reach the edge of the map. Teachers can take you only so far. The rest you must discover through your own pain, your own insight, your own relentless pursuit of truth. At this altitude, self-reliance is not a virtue, it is a necessity. You become your own strategist, your own historian, your own philosopher. You dissect your own failures, refine your own methods, sculpt your own worldview. You become the craftsman of your destiny, carving out your path with the precision of a sculptor chiseling marble. And the more you refine yourself, the more the world begins to respond in ways you never could have imagined. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. Your presence begins to shift rooms. Your clarity influences conversations. Your intuition detects tension before words are even spoken. Your silence becomes as meaningful as your speech. You no longer negotiate your worth, you project it. You no longer seek permission, you act. You no longer ask whether you are enough, You understand that the question itself was a cage built by people who feared your wings. This leads to the 17th law, the law that separates the rarest minds in history from everyone else: mastery over narrative. Not the narrative of others, the narrative of yourself. The genius realizes that the story he tells himself becomes the architecture of his reality. If he tells himself he is misunderstood, he becomes isolated. If he tells himself he is destined for greatness, he becomes unstoppable. If he tells himself he is cursed, he becomes bitter. If he tells himself he is chosen, he becomes powerful. Narrative is the invisible throne from which all internal power is exercised. Machiavelli understood this deeply. Rulers do not merely command armies, they command stories. They influence how people interpret events. They shape perceptions so skillfully that people follow them not because they are forced, but because they believe. And the genius must become this kind of ruler, not of nations, but of his own consciousness. He must choose a story that fuels him, not breaks him, a story that sharpens him, not weakens him, a story that elevates him beyond the reach of fear, doubt, and the mediocrity that once tried to suffocate him. And with that mastery comes the 18th law. Power flows to those who can carry its weight. The world does not reward intelligence alone, nor talent alone, nor ambition alone. It rewards resilience. It rewards the ability to endure what others cannot. The criticism, the jealousy, the loneliness, the misunderstandings, the responsibilities. Power is heavy, influence is heavy, vision is heavy, and only those who have strengthened themselves through adversity can bear the burden without collapsing under its pressure. This burden becomes the refining fire. It burns away weakness, burns away hesitation, burns away everything inside you that was built from fear. It leaves behind the hardened core of who you truly are. And once you stand rooted in that core, something remarkable happens. You cease being controlled by the world, and the world begins responding to you. Your energy shifts, your decisions ripple, your presence influences outcomes. Not because you force anything, but because your internal power radiates outward with such clarity that the external world cannot ignore it. This is the essence of the 19th law. Ascend until resistance becomes irrelevant. At lower levels, every opinion matters, every attack stings, every failure feels catastrophic. But the higher you rise in self-mastery, the less the noise reaches you. A king does not hear the gossip of peasants. A philosopher does not fear the insults of the ignorant. A warrior does not tremble at the sound of distant threats. When you have conquered your own mind, the world's attempts to diminish you become background static, heard but powerless, and this is the final transformation. The genius becomes untouchable not through arrogance, but through inner liberation. He no longer measures himself by external metrics. He no longer seeks validation from those who lack vision. He no longer doubts the path that only he can see. He knows the truth that eludes the many. Destiny does not choose you. You choose it by declaring that you will not live an ordinary life. But there is one last understanding. The 20th and final law: greatness is meaningless if you do not act. Knowledge without action rots. Insight without execution decays. Vision without steps becomes regret. The world is filled with people who could have transformed everything around them, but they silence themselves out of fear. They let hesitation steal their youth. Let procrastination steal their potential. Let the comfort of mediocrity steal the life they were meant to live. A genius rises not because he knows what to do, but because he does what others refuse to. He steps forward when others hesitate. He takes risks when others retreat. He endures discomfort that others avoid. He becomes the architect of worlds others are too afraid to imagine. And now the truth stands before you with a sharpness that cuts through every illusion. Nothing in your life will change until you decide to rise. Not tomorrow, not when circumstances improve, not when you feel ready. Power belongs to those who seize it before the world tells them they deserve it. Destiny belongs to those who step into the unknown before it feels safe. You have seen the path. You have felt the weight. You have tasted the clarity that few ever reach. Now the question becomes, will you remain who you have been, or will you become who you were meant to be? Because this world does not reward the brilliant, it rewards the brave. And if you want to rise above everyone else, if you want to stand where legends stand, If you want to live a life that forces the world to turn its head and take notice, then there is only one path left for you to walk. Step into your power. Break the limits they placed around you. Silence the voices that try to shrink you. Defy the gravity of mediocrity and rise so far above this world that no one, not fear, not doubt, not the judgments of small minds, can ever pull you back down again. Now go. Become the force they never saw coming. Become the mind they can never predict. Become the legend they will never forget.